Hello, this is Chris Heasley with the Chris Heasley Radio Show. The process by which our elected officials arise to office is a beautiful process. It is an organic process. It is a process by which they arise out of our own neighborhoods. They are our neighbors. They arise out of our own neighborhoods to this elected office. And they, as coming from our own neighborhoods, they drive on the same roads that we drive on. Their children attend the same schools that our children attend. They walk in the same parks that we walk in. They share the same emergency services that we share. They attend the same churches and other religious institutions that we attend. And they arise to office in that way. And as such, they have an intimate connection to us. Their fate is tied to our fate, and our fate is tied to their fate. And so when they attain office, it can only be assumed that they will be acting in our own best interests. This is not a hard equation to understand. This is not a difficult thing. And it's not a difficult thing to achieve either. And so when our elected officials continue to act against our interests, when things continue to go awry, we have to ask the question, why is this happening? And around the year 1965, a movie was released. It was called The Manchurian Candidate. And the premise of the movie was about how foreign adversaries would attain ownership of our elected officials through corrupt methods. They would attain ownership of our elected officials, and they would initiate a plan to rot our country from the inside out. The elected officials would begin implementing the agenda of our foreign adversaries and mimicking their talking points. And the reason that this movie came to be is because at that point in time, in the 1960s, our country was fresh off the victory of World War II, where America had defeated the two strongest military powers of that time. America had defeated the Nazi Germany and the Japanese Empire. Prior to that, in American history, America had defeated the greatest military of all time, the British Empire, on two separate occasions. And with this series of victories, the world had concluded that America could not be defeated with a frontal assault, and that America would have to be compromised from within. And on this premise, the Manchurian Candidate was conceived. At that time, around the 1960s, the Soviet Union had a leader, a Russian man by the name of Nikita Khrushchev. He was the premier of the Soviet Union. And Nikita Khrushchev was invited to speak at the United Nations. And when he arrived at the United Nations for his turn to speak and he began to walk to the podium, he stared directly at the American delegation with a cold, direct, vicious stare. And he walked to the podium and he got to the podium and he kept that stare on the American delegation. And he reached down and took his shoe off of his foot and began to pound that shoe onto the podium as he stared at the Americans. And he said over and over again, "We will beat you from within." When the American public saw this act in the 1960s, it shot a shot of fear across the American public. The Americans, they did not fully understand what Nikita Khrushchev meant, but they got his message. They knew that he was a man of serious intent. And today, if you go to try to find evidence of this incident, it has almost entirely been scrubbed from the internet. It is as if people do not want you to know that that happened, but it did happen. It did happen because I was a children in the 1970s, and our parents told us about this incident. Our parents saw it, and they talked about it amongst friends and family. Everybody was concerned about what Nikita Khrushchev had said. When our elected officials continue to trip up and make mistakes and continue to act against our interests, but they act as if it's just a haphazard series of mistakes. They just keep tripping over themselves as if they're bumbling idiots or They're just clueless fools. And they continue to make these mistakes over and over again. It's just a continual series of accidents. And they chalk it up to this buffoonery. But when it continues to happen, it becomes statistically impossible for this to just be a set of coincidences. And eventually you have to conclude that this continual acting against our interests is a concerted effort. And we have to ask the question, are our elected officials acting in our own interests, or are they acting in interests alien to our own? Are they acting in the interests of foreign adversaries? Are they operatives? These are the questions of our time. Military leaders around the world have concluded that third generational warfare is a thing of the past. It will not be done any longer. And what third generational warfare means is it means traditional land armies, tanks and men going after over large swaths of land to meet in battle. That is a thing of the past. And what is deployed today is fourth and fifth generation warfare. It's new age warfare. And that means information war and psychological warfare. These are the new means of strategic warfare. As part of that is a program. It is called MK Ultra. It stands for Mind Control Ultra. It is an acknowledged governmental program run by our intelligence agencies. And this program, the purpose of this program is to perfect the ability to control the minds of others. And so our military leaders and our intelligence agencies, they have been using these tactics for some time. They've practiced them, they've rehearsed them, they have them down, they have them perfected. But you see, there's always been a law in place that states that they cannot use these tactics on the American public. However, during the Barack Obama administration, that rule got reversed, and they could then begin using these tactics on the American public. When our elected officials continually refer to us in derogatory terms, like, for example, they continue to call us uneducated, they call us bigoted, racist, they call us ignorant, they call us all of these terms, it is clear that they have an adversarial relationship with their constituents. Could you imagine if, instead of constantly using derogatory terms to refer to Americans, our elected officials referred to us as polite, decent, good, intelligent, hardworking? But they don't. They only use derogatory terms when referring to the American public. And the question becomes, are they employing these sort of subversive tactics against the American public? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give you one example of a locally elected official who continues to conspire against our interests. I'm going to give you an example, and I'm going to ask you if you think that she's using these tactics against us. And that person is Congresswoman Lizzie Fletcher, okay? And the situation that I'm going to describe right now is what is happening on our southern border. What's happening on our southern border is a complete disintegration of our border. It is lawlessness and upheaval of society on our southern border. Families and towns and cities and counties that are on the border are being ravaged. They're being overwhelmed with an influx of migratory invaders. County sheriffs and local police can no longer protect the people because so many people are overwhelming our border. 130,000 fighting-age men have come over that border in just the past few years. That is a foreign army equivalent. And within that group of men comes a serious criminal element that includes human trafficking, child trafficking, narcotics distribution, and fentanyl. Fentanyl, it's a poison. It has only one intent. Its intent is to kill. And it is being sprinkled on candy and on foods here in America with the intent of killing our people. This effort is being led by the cartels. This is the reality of what's happening on our border. But you see, When Lizzie Fletcher describes what's happening on the border, she has a completely different description from reality. And she uses very flowery, pacifistic terms when describing it. So, for example, she refers to these military fighting age men equivalent men as refugees, as if we should apply a victimhood status to them. She refers to these fighting age equivalent men, this incident on the border, as a humanitarian crisis, as if it's a victimhood situation, as if we should have some sort of sorrow for these people. President Trump attempted to lock down the border, and Lizzie Fletcher fought her heart out to stop that effort. Lizzie Fletcher's constituents confronted her at a town hall meeting and confronted her with the necessity to build a wall. And she laughed it off. She dismissed it. And she said, maybe we can have some fencing go up. So what is she's doing is she's applying the tactics of a fast-talking salesman, a con artist, when describing this. And the question becomes, why? She refers to these migratory invaders as our neighbors. I will give you a quote right now about how she refers to what's happening at the border. She said, quote, "We believe in being a welcoming place and in taking care of our neighbors," unquote. I will translate that for you. What she is saying is that we will grant this migratory invasion, we will grant them access to our country. But not only has she done that, she has voted for this movement to be given food, water, medical assistance, shelter. She's voted for you to fund the migratory invasion that's taking over your country. She's even voted for this migratory invasion for these people to have legal representation. She's voting for them to have lawyers from your tax dollars. Lizzie Fletcher's congressional district includes Sunnyside and Sharpstown. And these communities will be the first that once this criminal element comes into our area, they will set themselves into those towns. They will, just like the border towns are being ravaged today, we can expect a criminal element to hit Lizzie Fletcher's own district. But yet Lizzie Fletcher does not raise even a word in defense, in support of her constituents. And so the question becomes why? This is the Chris Heasley Show. And on this show, we will give you all of the ideas, the content, the information that you need to take back your communities. And on today's show, we have two guests. We have Kenneth Amori and G2. Kenneth Amori is running for Congress against Lizzie Fletcher, and G2 is an activist, a freedom activist. But with Kenneth Amori, I'd like to just give a short introduction of Kenneth. Kenneth is an immigrant who came here to achieve the American dream, and he has achieved it. He has a very successful career as a CPA. He's an accountant. But upon arrival, he sees the dire situation that our country is coming to. And as such, he is running to this situation like a fireman attempting to put out a fire. And what today's session can be considered is it's essentially like an emergency session where three men are coming together to discuss this situation and how to respond to it. And with that being said, I'd like to introduce Kenneth. Kenneth, it's very good to meet you. How are you doing today?
Thank you so much for this opportunity. The amazing work you're doing. I admire your work, and I want to thank you for giving me this platform.
Excellent. Very good. So I'd like to start off. I had quite an introduction, and I just want to ask you, did I get it right? Did I describe what's happening at the border in correct terms? What is your opinion of what's going on there?
Every American today should be concerned about what's happening in the southern border. Just last year alone, the death through fentanyl use in America was at an all-time high, peaking at over 112,000 Americans. Let me put that into perspective for you. The number of people who died from the war in Afghanistan, the number of people who died from the war in Iraq, and the number of American soldiers who died from Vietnam War, when you put those numbers together, they are not as much as the people who have died from the use of fentanyl. if you don't see that as a warfare, I don't think there's anything else we could see more as threatening to Americans. And just to add to that, the number of deaths, the highest amount of death among young people in America between the ages of 18 to 45 is from the use of fentanyl. And where do you think these fentanyl come into this country from the most? From the southern border, based on the information we have. So that should concern every well-meaning American, and that should be in the mouth of every patriot in this country today.
You know, Kenneth, what is frightening is that they're lacing this fentanyl with children's candies. And so now the people of Sunnyside, the people of Westview, the people of Bel Air, the people of Sharpstown, when they take their children on trick-or-treating, or goodness gracious, God forbid, your child sees a piece of candy on the ground, it is now a mortal threat for a child to eat even a piece of candy. G2, are you there? I'm not hearing G2 come through. So with that being said, Kenneth, what can you tell me? Do you see the people of your district, the people of Bel Air, the people of Sunnyside, do you see this fentanyl potentially reaching that community?
It's absolutely a concern. And just to give you a little bit background about the district, this district is the most culturally diverse district in the state of Texas. Not one of the most culturally diverse districts, the most culturally diverse district in the state of Texas. And when you actually take a look at the communities that are most hit with the use of this hard drug, the community of color is actually a very, very important, very, very big part of that, negative impact of that, the use of fentanyl.
You know, there's another element that we're not considering, and it is the people of Sunnyside, the people of Sharpstown. I think it's safe to say that that's not the community that houses the architects, the doctors, the lawyers. And this migratory invasion is an attempt to replace our workforce, and it will replace all elements, all levels of our workforce, even the higher, the more technical professions. But without a doubt, and most certainly, it is going to affect the people of Sunnyside first. That the migratory invasion that is happening, the people of Sunnyside, the people of Sharpstown, the intent is for them to be replaced. Can you speak on that?
Well, I sincerely believe that when we look at the issue of immigration, we need to be able to see things from a very, very comprehensive perspective. Comprehensive in the sense that America as a country is not a country that hates immigrants. I stand to negate that narrative. America is a country where the child of a nobody can become somebody without knowing anybody. I love this country. As someone who came here from Africa, I can tell you America still represents a land of opportunities. And the opportunities that I found here in America is like nowhere else in the world. I mean, how will you compare a child who used to sell on the streets of Africa today running for a seat in the United States Congress? But sitting before you is such an individual. So let's not miss the fact that this country is still a land of opportunities, but there are ways there are legal ways to come into this country. And I think that is what we are advocating for. There's a difference between legal immigration and illegal immigration. And I believe that the people who are ensuring that this country stem the tide against illegal immigration, I think it's a good fight.
Right. And I'd like to just jump back to that fentanyl point. I want to check one more time and see if we have G2 on the line. G2, are you there?
I'm here.
Excellent. Very good. So I want to just jump back. We were talking about the fentanyl distribution coming from our southern border and how Lizzie Fletcher describes that situation on the southern border in flowery terms, as if there's a victimhood. These people coming here are victims, they're refugees. She uses the term unaccompanied child, referring to the children, when we really know that the truth is that those children are being trafficked. Why would she use that term when referring to children that are being trafficked over the border?
Well, they use the term unaccompanied minor because it makes it sound like this is a poor child who somehow struggled by itself to get to the United States and it needs our help. This child needs protection. And, it makes it a sympathetic term. But as you indicate, there is no such thing as an unaccompanied minor. There are no children off in the neighborhoods of Guatemala, Honduras, or Yemen who are saying, I just have to get to Texas, so I'm going to go by myself, march through some of the most harsh terrain you could find, through territory controlled by ruthless drug cartels, and at the age of 12, I'm going to fight my way to get to Texas. It just isn't happening. Every single child that comes into this country across that border is accompanied by someone. The cartels are the organizations, these international drug cartel crime organizations, criminal organizations, are the organizations that have been given the franchise to operate that border. They operate that border just as someone who has a Dunkin' Donuts franchise or a McDonald's franchise operates a restaurant. They operate it with a franchise granted to them by the globalists that are now in control of the United States government. So they can bring anyone or anything across that border they want. And they bring children across, and I think it's for multiple reasons. Some of those children end up in labor. Some of those children actually get reunited with family members. And a lot of those children end up being used for sexual slavery to serve the pedophile market in the United States, which is about a $9 billion market, according to the people at Underground Railroad Project who have studied this closely.
Well, I'd like to say
it's a large market, it's a profitable market, and they are brought here to serve that market. There is no such thing as an unaccompanied minor.
And that's why I appreciate my guest today, because we're not going to put a flowery term on this. We're not going to do that. We're going to present the threats that are facing the people of Lizzie Fletcher's district. And we're going to present you with the question, why is Lizzie Fletcher defending this invasion at our border? Kenneth talked about the fentanyl and how fentanyl has killed more Americans than some of our largest military conflicts, the Vietnam War and the such. And G2, can you speak on the fentanyl and how many of our children are at threat of this fentanyl, of being killed from this fentanyl that's coming over the border?
Well, the thing with the fentanyl that is most troubling is that everyone knows where it's coming from. The fentanyl materials come from the Chinese Communist Party, go to the cartels process it, deliver it into the United States, and then manage distribution coast to coast, river to lakes, and manage it right down to the retail level, down to the street level. And the thing with this fentanyl, as I think we all now know, is that if you get a dose that is too strong, and it's a very, very small amount to get too strong, or to get to a lethal dose. If you get a lethal dose, there is no recovery. Most police cruisers in America now carry this injection called Narcan, which will offset overdoses of certain opiates. It doesn't work against an overdose of fentanyl. The fentanyl is simply too strong. And if you get a pill that has fentanyl in it, that could be sold as any number of different kinds of drugs, but a pill that comes from a cartel that has manufactured that pill but hasn't used the same level of quality management that you might have in a pharmaceutical plant, that pill might have what's called a hotspot. If you take a pill that has a hotspot, that is a concentrated amount of fentanyl, and you get one of those, you're dead. So we're losing 100,000 a year to fentanyl, and people think this is happening in everyone else's neighborhood, but this is happening in suburban markets, it's happening in rural areas, and it's happening in every urban market in the country. 100,000 people a year is the equivalent of a plane crash every day. That's now a common way to look at this, to try to help people understand. If we had a plane falling out of the sky every day, we would shut down an entire commercial airline industry. But we don't react. The government is not reacting. There's no effort to stop the Chinese from delivering the chemicals. There's no effort to stop the cartels from bringing it in. We're just allowing this chemical weapon to be used against our people to undermine this nation, to kill our children, and there's no reaction.
And so
It is a disaster.
right now we are presenting the mortal threats to the people of Lizzie Fletcher's district and asking the question, why does she defend this process? It is as if she's acting on the interests of a foreign adversary. And that's the question of the day. And I'd like to shift the conversation to another common tactic that is used when a military power intends to defeat another military power. And what they do is they advocate for the overproduction, overprinting of a currency. So overprinting of a currency has been a tactic that has been used for centuries to take down societies. And now here we are. The Federal Reserve has diluted our currency to a point where everybody feels it. Everybody sees the inflation. The inflation's at a considerable level. And I'm going to ask again, is Lizzie Fletcher deflecting on the issue? Because what Lizzie Fletcher did is she advocated and voted for something called the Inflation Reduction Act, which does not even mention the Federal Reserve that we can find. It does not go near the root of the issue, which is the overprinting of a currency. This is common sense. If you want to fix a currency, you simply quit overprinting it. What does the Inflation Reduction Act do? It's a green energy initiative where we begin spending our money on very high cost, expensive green energies. It's a tax at the gas pump. It's a tax on oil and gas. And it is a addition of 87,000, I believe, IRS agents to come after you to make sure you're paying your taxes. That's Lizzie Fletcher's answer for reducing inflation. So when you go to buy a stick of gum at the grocery store and you see that it's gone up and you can't afford it anymore, know that Lizzie Fletcher is adding more IRS agents to the payroll to go after you if you don't pay your taxes. And that's her solution for inflation reduction. Kenneth, can you tell me what you think about the Inflation Reduction Act? Does that in any way, shape, or form address inflation?
So, thank you so much again. I try as much as possible as an educator myself. I've been teaching for about 7 years now at the community college. A lot of these big words, these big terms, are not as easily comprehensible by the ordinary man on the street. So let's break that down so that everyone who is listening to this radio show would understand what it's meant in English. If the goal of the Inflation Reduction Act, just as the name states, is inflation reduction, when you go to the grocery store, has the price of your groceries gone down? When you go to the gas station, what do you experience a reduction in the cost of your?
Well, I have an answer for that if you don't mind. You know, when I go to the Pakistani community in Fort Bend County and Harris County, they own so many convenience stores, and it seems like they know better than anyone what's going on with inflation because they're constantly registering their inventory, the new sticks of gum, the new candy bars, so on and so forth. And when you talk with these people and you bring up these topics, they get very heated very quick. Please,
Yes.
to your point.
So if you and I, ordinary Americans, agree that the prices of things are going up and things are going more expensive, then all of those buzzwords, the Inflation Reduction Act and all of those things that are being done, a lot of people care less about that. If the impact of those policies are not felt by the ordinary man on the street, then it's all garbage. Today, Americans have no idea when we say the national debt, for example, is over 34 trillion US dollars. Let me make that make sense. Because we want to break this down so that our listeners understand what that means in practical terms. The number of people in America today is about 330 million people. If we owe over $34 trillion in debt, if you divide that number by the number of people in America, each individual walking on the streets would owe more than 100,000 US dollars. Now let me extend that by saying, not in our lifetime would that debt be fully paid off. So we're actually stacking up debt for not just for us, for our children, our children's children. We are mortgaging their future. We need more fiscal responsibility in government. The last time the US budget was in balance was about 22 years ago. So what that means in practical terms is that we are spending more than we are earning. We can't continue that level of recklessness at the national level. And we actually need more accountants in Congress. We have only 4 accountants, four CPAs today in Congress, out of 535 members of the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House. We have only 4 accountants. And we wonder why there's so much recklessness at that level. We need more people who understand the practicality of fiscal responsibility to be our legislators.
I think the argument that you're bringing is that when the people of your congressional district, when they look at their sons and daughters, they can know that before that child can begin to put down a down payment on a house when they get to that age, they have to pay the taxes of the spending that Lizzie Fletcher is advocating for in Congress. The hurdle that is being put in front of our children is so considerable that before they can even, they start out in debt. They're drowning in debt. And before they can even begin to make an attempt at a better life for themselves, they have to pay down this considerable, debt that our government's incurring, and that Lizzie Fletcher is largely advocating for. G2, I have a question for you. Does the Inflation Reduction Act address inflation?
Well, yes, but not in the way you wish it did, right? So, like most of the bills that go through the U.S. Congress, the Inflation Reduction Act is completely mislabeled, and I think you made a great point, Kenneth, a moment ago. This is a fraudulent bill. I call it the Inflation Acceleration Act. It does affect inflation. It increases inflation. And after that bill was passed and became a law, the people who sponsored it said openly in conversations that they labeled it Inflation Reduction Act because they knew the American people were getting upset about inflation, and they wanted them to believe that this act did something to reduce it. It does not. It is a massive spending bill. It pumps huge amounts of newly printed money into the economy with no economic justification. As you said, it is designed not to somehow address inflation, but to drive this energy policy that creates an economy that is dependent upon the most expensive and unreliable forms of energy, which are not at all green. If you look at the carbon footprint of a windmill, if you look at the damage it does to wildlife, it becomes pretty clear pretty quickly that there are a lot of ways to make the environment better. These green energy sources are not the way. So you've got a bill that is actually pushing extraordinarily huge numbers, large amounts of fake money printing to advance the political agenda that in fact doesn't achieve anything that benefits the American people. So why would they do this? Well, because that money disappears. No one tracks where the Inflation Reduction Act money. Nobody tracks where that money went. It's just gone. They just add another couple of trillion to the debt, and no one knows where. Your point about it, $100,000 per U.S. person is correct. But remember, if you remove children and you take out the half of the American public that does not pay taxes, it's actually on a taxpayer basis about $250,000 per taxpayer. As you said, you're exactly right. There's no way that this debt ever gets repaid. We have no scenario where it gets repaid. And the government now is running $2 trillion deficits and will continue to run deficits in excess of $1 trillion into the foreseeable future. There's no plan even to reduce the excess spending. So, in fact, they're not doing anything to reduce inflation, which is caused by excessive government spending and printing of money. They're not doing anything to reduce that. In fact, they're accelerating inflation. So what are they doing with interest rates? Well, to offset the extraordinary printing of money, they drive up interest rates. Who's hurt by that? The American consumer, who now has to pay a higher number for their house, has to write a larger check for their car, for the employment.
Well, I think that I think that what we're identifying here, again, I'm just going to present the question: why would Lizzie Fletcher describe this bill as an Inflation Reduction Act when it is, as G2 said, the Inflation Acceleration Act? It's deceitful, it's corrupt, it is dishonest, and she is obviously trying to pull something over on her constituents. And I think that her constituents need to challenge her on this point. But further,
so let me to your point there. You're right. It is a deceitful term. Anyone who has analyzed this knows that this act does nothing to reduce inflation. So she is trying to deceive the voters of your district, and she knows what it does. And that means if she's supporting that kind of bill, if she's supporting the fake infrastructure bill or the bill that then removed the debt limit until 2025, anyone who supported those is not representing the interests of the American people or, as a member of Congress, the people in her district. In fact, the people she's representing are those who have, as I call it, their beak in the government trough, the people who are feeding off of that mass corruption, feeding off of that extraordinarily irresponsible spending. It's not the American people that any elected official supporting this is serving. It is the corrupt who are taking the money from government and benefiting from this inflationary spending.
I'd like to shift to a next topic. Kenneth, can you tell me about the Green New Deal and if Lizzie Fletcher supports the Green New Deal?
Well, one thing to note is that she has voted 100% with the Nancy Pelosi-led House bills. And, of course, we know that's one of them. I come from the oil and gas background. My last corporate America experience was with Schlumberger, which is one of the world's largest oil fields companies. And it's such a sad experience today that the U.S., which, as far as we know, was almost independent, oil independent, energy independent, is now actually asking countries like Venezuela for oil. I think that's something that is not just detrimental to the well-being of the oil and gas industry. Of course, CD7 is one of the hotbed of oil and gas companies, right? All of the big oil and gas companies are in Houston. Houston is the world capital of oil and gas. I think it's very negatively impactful on the oil and gas industry, and I think we should reject anything that takes us back rather than forward. And that's one of the things that I think she supports.
Okay, so she has to cater to the oil and gas constituents, employees, those type of businesses, because they largely make up her district, right? And you could see that rhetoric in all of her statements where she sort of mouths support for oil and gas or proposes the idea that she is supporting oil and gas. Is she actually in support of traditional energy sources?
Well, today there's so much talk about the shifting from the traditional fossil fuel to the renewable energy, and that's not a good thing for the oil and gas industry. As someone who came from the oil and gas industry, I can tell you for sure that is, even if not just today, in the next medium to long term, is going to impact negatively on the oil and gas industry. So yes, that is not a plus for the oil and gas industry.
G2, what do you think? Is the Green New Deal, is that the New Deal we should all be shooting for? Is that going to bring our country to energy efficiencies, a higher quality of life, lower cost of living? What's the real deal with the Green Deal, G2?
I think there are two main impacts here that are really important. And your point about Schlumberger, Kenneth, is a really good one. Obviously, the oil and gas industry is a big employer, and that is nationwide. And we know that the advent of new technologies like directional drilling that have really opened up access to new oil and gas deposits in the United States that were not economically accessible just a few decades ago. So that's totally changed the world's oil and gas energy landscape. So much so that that the United States has now become a dominant player and can actually offset or threaten the control held by OPEC. Now remember that this thing called BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, these formerly developing nations that are now really developed, that group now has members that include Saudi Arabia. BRICS now controls 60% of the world's oil and gas reserves, 60%. So you've got OPEC and BRICS to deal with now. The only way the United States can secure its own future is to make certain that we have access to domestic oil and gas energy that is able to be tapped in a cost-effective manner. So what is this doing to the public? Well, we all remember a couple of years ago when we found out that Texas had already shifted something in the neighborhood of 20 to 25% of its energy supply over to what are called green energy. They're not green, but that's what they're called. And as a result, when a cold snap hit Texas, people died because there was not sufficient energy production, energy access to heat the homes, to serve the Texas markets. And there were people that actually died in a cold snap in Texas. It's unimaginable that you're sitting on one of the greatest energy reserves in the world, and people are dying because they can't get access to energy because of these flawed government policies. Anyone supporting those policies is not serving the American consumer who needs access to energy. Another factor, though, is the competitiveness of our economy. While we are shifting to the highest cost, lowest reliability sources of energy, China, India, and other countries are building coal-fired power plants and natural gas-fired power plants and nuclear power plants as fast as they can build them. In other words, we're shifting to the lowest cost, most unreliable sources of energy, the highest cost, most unreliable sources. We're shifting to the opposite, the lowest cost, most reliable. We're going to have an economy that is going to be dependent upon such high-cost energy that we will struggle yet again to compete with those that we compete with around the world, BRICS nations and others who are developing a grid that is low cost and reliable.
So if I can just summarize here, the BRICS coalition of governments is a coalition of governments that was specifically set up to oppose the globalist agenda and America under the Democrat Party, their advocacy of the globalist agenda. So in effect, the BRICS agenda is in opposition to the U.S. dollar. And as a result of that, they control a huge amount of our energy sector, and at the same time, of the world's energy sector, I mean to say, and at the same time, essentially, I think what G2 is saying is that we are sort of shutting down our own energy sector and running ourselves dry. Did I get that right, G2?
Yeah, you did. BRICS was set up to create an economic competitor to the United States and the West. And they've done that, but now they're getting stronger because they're getting larger. It is a cartel. It is a syndicate, a group designed to collude, to shift economic power away from Western nations, the United States and Europe, and shift it to these countries that are portrayed as developing. And they're portrayed as developing despite the fact that they have robust, very mature economies. So the inability or refusal of American leaders to prepare the United States to compete with BRICS, the refusal of the American leadership, including any representative that isn't supporting for the United States, it is really as if those leaders are colluding with our enemies, our competitors, to undermine this nation. Why are they doing that? Well, because people are making a lot of money drinking from the fountain of cash that is spewing from the government, and its justification. The justification for all this wasteful spending are these climate stories and this desire to go to these inefficient, high-cost, low-reliability energy sources. They're doing it for money.
So again, the whole purpose of this show is to get our political representatives tied down to their own constituents. We've lost them. They're ungrounded. They're untied. They're for sale. We're giving you so many examples in today's show. We're giving you an hour of content showing you how after time, our elected leaders, they work against our interests and they work for the interests of foreign adversaries. But I'd like to make another point. One of the things that that we've noticed with the Democrat Party, the American Democrat Party, is they seem to be tied to the globalist agenda. And the globalist agenda, the globalists, they are essentially a group of billionaires out of Europe that have been sprinkling cash on the Democrat Party for the past 2 decades. Again, when I was a child, that Democrat Party, it fought for our values, it fought for us. But it's been taken over by the European billionaire class and to some extent by the American billionaire class. It's been taken over. It's become toxic. It is now owned by the billionaire class. And the billionaire class, they subscribe to the globalist agenda, the George Soros agenda, to consolidate power in fewer governments around the world. Because when you consolidate power into fewer governments, it's easier to corrupt them. You never want it diversified. Diversity is harder to corrupt. So they want less governments. They want more centralized control. It's easier to corrupt. That is the purpose of the globalist agenda. And you see, there's 2 sets of people that oppose that agenda. Number one, it is the American citizenry. And that is why the establishment has it out for us. But the other group that opposes that is the country of Russia. Russia does not want to report to George Soros. It does not want to report to the globalists. It wants to stay tethered to its Orthodox Russian heritage. And that is a problem for the globalists. And when you're a problem for the globalists, you're a problem for the American Democrat Party. The American Democrat Party is implementing the globalist agenda. And so the American Democrat Party has, for several years now, been advocating for this bloody war with a sovereign nation, with Russia. The American Democrat Party has a bloodlust, a blood penchant for the people of Russia. This is your political party advocating for a war with a sovereign country, okay? And they're taking every last dollar that you have in your wallet and using it to fund this bloody engagement. Again, this is not a war between Russia and the Ukraine. This is a proxy war where Ukraine is used as a proxy. It is really a war between the American Democrat Party and the sovereign country of Russia. But as a result of it, we have lost more than 350,000 Ukrainians. The world has lost that many people because of the Democrat Party's agenda. We are witnessing an ethnic genocide because of this agenda. Where does Lizzie Fletcher stand on this? Lizzie Fletcher, absolutely. Through all of her statements, she has advocated for the funding of this bloody war, sending more of our dollars to this bloody war. And they're going to send our dollars up until the point that they get the political opportunity to send our sons and daughters. Send our sons and daughters up against the Russian infantry, the million-man Russian infantry. I will tell you right now, the American people don't want that. The Russian people don't want that. But the American Democrats want that, and Lizzie Fletcher wants it. Go look at her public statements on Russia. She never advocates for peace. She advocates for more bloody war. During the Trump administration, we had 4 years of no war. Some people call that unpresidential. I call that an act of humanity. Kenneth, if you get elected to Congress, will you vote to fund more funding to the war with Russia?
So I'm going to thank you. I want to take you back to just less than 2 weeks ago. There was this bill called the Border Security Bill. And in that bill, it was supposed to be for $118 billion if that bill had passed. Now, of that amount, the actual amount that was meant for the border security was about $20 billion, which is approximately about 1/5, less than 1/6 actually, less than, if you divide that number, maybe about 1/6% was actually for border security. And guess what? $60 billion from that bill was meant to fund the war in Russia. Ukraine and Russia war. So I sincerely believe that that bill should not have passed or should not. And I'm glad that, it was shut down, because up till now it's not been sent to the House, and they've not going to. If I were in Congress, when we get to Congress, such a bill would not pass, because if you call a bill border security bill, it should be for border security and not to fund further wars.
Well, I think your point is very astute. It clearly shows this dichotomy where it is an easy to understand common sense solution. Fund the American border. It's not hard to figure out. But I think that the other point is that we need to begin advocating for peace. There are too many people getting hurt with this lust for blood that our American Democrat Party has. And this is happening on our watch. And I challenge all of the people of her district to begin calling her and telling her, pressing her to quit calling for more funding of this bloody engagement. So, Kenneth, you were talking about the border. What would it take to secure the border? If you're Congress, if you are the Congress, if you are elected to office, what will it take to secure that border?
So I think it's a very commonsensical approach to securing the border. We don't need any additional bill. We don't need any additional, we just need to shut down the border. It's as simple as that. There is nowhere else in the world that have the level of open border that we have currently in the U.S. So I think that's, the will. I think the will to shutting down, closing the border is what is lacking. It's not the measures to shutting it down. It is the will to doing it.
G2, what do you think? If the Republicans are able to take back the presidency and the such, is it a possibility that we can close that border?
Well, look, I think one of the great outcomes of this discussion of the border security bill, as they tried to call it, is that the American people realized, as that bill was being negotiated, that it, in fact, didn't secure the border. It would guarantee a minimum of 5,000 a day illegal entrance into the United States before any kind of restrictions could be applied. That's 1.8 million a year that would come into the country guaranteed. So, in fact, it locked in a steady stream of illegal immigration for as long as we could see into the future, forever. There's no $20 billion needed to secure the border. We don't need one more penny to secure the border. We don't need one more law to secure the border. And we certainly don't need to fund wars in other countries in order to secure our border. As Kenneth said, we need the will to do so. The folks that are in control right now and the people who are supporting them, it is not a matter of incompetence, inability, or a lack of legal ability or lack of resources to secure that border. They want that border open. And they know that we have huge numbers of people come across that are illegal aliens who have entered the country since the Democrat Party took over our government. 10 million, without any knowledge who these people are. And they're from every country in the world. They're not just from Mexico, Guatemala, and Honduras. They're not only being brought in to provide lower wages for the large multinationals. They're being brought in for a host of other reasons. But the people doing it are not incompetent. They are doing this on purpose. It is not an accident. They need nothing more to stop it. They can make the decision to stop it now. And it's clear that they do not care about the fentanyl coming across the people it's killing. They do support coming across and what's being done to them. And they support the importation of even enemy combatants from maybe the Chinese Communist Party. We've all seen thousands of military-age single Chinese coming across that border. It's expensive for them to pay the cartel fee to come. It is expensive to transit from the Darien Gap to the Texas border. They're not doing this accidentally.
So here, just to finish up, we got 1 minute left. And Kenneth, you're on the spot here, my friend. We're here to go time. We certainly support you in this endeavor to get elected. But I'll give you the last minute. How do people find out about your campaign, about you as a person, and the issues that you represent?
Yes, no, thank you so much. I am grateful to be on this platform, and a lot of the people who are listening to this, radio show, you can look us up on kennethforcongress.com. Follow us on social media. We have Facebook. We're on YouTube, on Facebook, and on Instagram. We're also on X, which is formerly Twitter. So please look us up, kennethforcongress.com. Look for the Republican ballot in this primary and vote for Kenneth for Congress in Texas Congressional District 7.
And this is the Chris Heasley Show. I'd like to thank my guest today, Kenneth Amori, running for Congress, and G2. We'll be back again on Monday, 10 a.m. Talk to you soon.